What if the worst part of your punishment was surviving it? In the darkest corners of medieval Europe, there existed a method of execution so cruel, so methodically horrifying, that even death seemed like a mercy. It wasn't designed to kill swiftly. No, that would be far too kind. This punishment was made to break you, not just your body, but your dignity, your identity, your very soul. They called it the breaking wheel. Imagine this: you're dragged into a public square, stripped of all humanity, your name already erased by the cries of the mob. You're bound to a massive wooden wheel, splayed like a grotesque star. Before the first blow even lands, you hear the priest murmuring prayers, not for your survival, but for your soul's passage to judgment. Then comes the sound. A sharp, wet crack as iron meets bone, then another, and another. The crowd watches, some weep, others cheer. This wasn't just execution, it was theater, and you were the unwilling star. But why would anyone invent such torment? What kind of society could justify such spectacle, not only permitting it, but celebrating it? What deeper truths about faith, law, and cruelty are buried beneath the wheel's shattered spokes? And what's even more disturbing is how long it was used, and how many cheered while it happened. Understand the breaking wheel, we must first understand the world that created it. In medieval Europe, pain was not merely a consequence, it was a belief system. Suffering was seen as divine currency, the price for sin, a means of purification before the eyes of God. The church preached that the flesh was corrupt and weak, and only through agony could one's soul be cleansed. The wheel, then, was not just punishment, it was ritual. The legal system didn't stand apart from this worldview. It was fused to it. Justice was less about rehabilitation and more about symbolism. Courts were not only tasked with enforcing law, they were instruments of moral purification. A criminal had to be broken, not simply silenced. His pain had to match the weight of his sin, and his suffering had to be seen, shared, and remembered. Confessions extracted under torture were not just accepted, they were expected. A tortured confession was proof not of guilt, but of divine will revealing itself through pain. If you cried out the truth while your bones cracked, it was God speaking through your agony. Execution sites became sacred stages. The public square was transformed into a cathedral of fear. Onlookers gathered not simply to see justice served, but to witness the invisible hand of divine punishment in action. Every scream, every shattered limb was a sermon. And so, punishments were crafted with this religious theater in mind. Hanging or beheading might end a life quickly, but they lacked spectacle. They lacked endurance. The breaking wheel offered both. It satisfied the theology of torment. It projected power, the church's power to judge the soul, and the state's power to crush the body. Together, they forged a machine that would outlast centuries. But among all the tortures devised by the courts, among all the horrors justified by the cross, none matched the spectacle, the suffering, or the sheer artistry of the wheel. It was called the wheel, but it was far more than a simple tool. It was a masterpiece of cruelty, engineered to turn a human being into a spectacle of suffering. The process began with public assembly. Townspeople, nobles, clergy, children, all gathered in anticipation. A raised platform was constructed, or sometimes just a dirt patch surrounded by guards. At the center stood the executioner, waiting beside the wheel, a wooden cartwheel, reinforced with iron, weathered by blood and time. The condemned was dragged forward, bound and broken in spirit long before the first strike. He was laid down before the wheel, arms and legs outstretched. Then came the iron cudgel, a thick metal rod, heavy and unyielding. The executioner would raise it high and bring it down with precision, targeting specific points on the limbs, the long bones of the arms and legs, then the joints. Each strike was calibrated not to kill, but to maim. The goal was to fracture the body into pieces that could be woven into the spokes of the wheel. Snap, 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 a leg, an arm, a knee, a wrist. The crowd watched in silence or roared, depending on the crime. Each crack of bone was both an act of violence and a statement. This is what happens to those who defy the order. Then came the weaving. With limbs mangled and limp, the body was lifted and threaded into the wheel's frame. Sometimes the arms were twisted through one side, the legs through another, forming an X of shattered humanity. The wheel was then hoisted upright, fixed to a pole, and left for all to see. The condemned was often still alive, breathing, whimpering, watching the sky above them turn red with sunset or black with the wings of circling crows. There were two principal methods: breaking from below, where the wheel lay on the ground, and breaking from above, where the victim was hoisted on the wheel and struck through the bars. In some cases, a final blow, the coup de grace, was delivered to the chest or neck to end the suffering. But this mercy wasn't guaranteed. Survival could last hours, sometimes days. Imagine the priest kneeling beside the twitching form, whispering Latin prayers over the mangled body. Imagine the flies, the blood, the heat. The silence, punctured only by the distant sobs of a mother or the satisfied murmurs of the crowd. But the wheel wasn't just a tool of death. It was more than a method. It was a message, a symbol carved into law, into bone, into faith itself. The breaking wheel was not reserved for petty thieves or the desperate poor, at least, not at first. It was a punishment designed for the disruptors, the defiers, the unforgivable. Those who shattered not just the law, but the social fabric. Murderers were frequent candidates, especially those who killed their own kin or masters. Treason, too, brought the wheel down with crushing finality, but the crime that almost guaranteed a place beneath its spokes. Rebellion. Take Hans Burham, the drummer of Niklashausen. In 1476, this German peasant claimed to hear the Virgin Mary's voice urging reform, calling for the abolishment of taxes, the redistribution of church wealth, and the unity of rich and poor. He was no murderer. He spilled no blood, but his words, they were dynamite, dangerous. The church and nobility couldn't afford a populist uprising fueled by divine revelation, so they broke him. Another tale, darker, more primal, belongs to Peter Stump, the so-called werewolf of Bedburg. In 1589, Stump was accused of murder, cannibalism, incest, and of transforming into a wolf by night to feast on villagers. His confession was extracted under torture, unsurprising, given the times, and his punishment was not merely execution, but annihilation. His body was broken on the wheel in front of a roaring crowd, then burned, a final warning etched into flesh. But it wasn't just the crime, it was the context. Those who threatened the divine order, those who challenged hierarchy, those who dared to live outside the expected, these were the true targets. The wheel's power lay not only in its pain, but in its public message. This is what happens to those who stand out. In a world built on rigid lines, between ruler and ruled, sacred and sinful, man and monster, the breaking wheel was the final drawing of that line, a circle of punishment that could not be escaped. And the longer the death, the stronger the message. The condemned were not merely killed, they were displayed, left for days, even weeks, as a decaying testament to law and power. Birds pecked the remains, children whispered ghost stories. Priests pointed upward and downward, reminding the living of heaven and hell. The wheel became more than punishment, it became myth, a dark halo of divine judgment where flesh met steel and justice met theater. But what happens when pain becomes politics and the crowd becomes complicit? The breaking wheel was never just for the condemned. It was a performance, and every performance needs an audience. In medieval Europe, execution was not a private affair conducted behind closed prison gates. It was an event, a ritual, a grotesque carnival that transformed the town square into a theater of suffering. Market stalls were often set up near the scaffold. Merchants sold food, wine, and trinkets. Parents brought their children, nobles sat beneath canopies, and peasants jostled for a view. Why? Because the breaking wheel didn't just punish the body, it reinforced the boundaries of obedience, and everyone was expected to watch. Civic duty blurred with bloodlust. The public display served to unify society, not through compassion, but through fear. The message was clear: step out of line, and this could be you. Some onlookers were quiet, stunned into silence by the horror. Others wept, especially when the condemned was young or once respected. But many cheered, some laughed. Others turned away when the bones cracked, only to glance back again a moment later. In a world without television, without novels or newspapers, executions were storytelling in its rawest form. A man on a wheel became a living parable. His suffering became the script, and the crowd, the audience, and the co-authors. Children grew up watching bones break before they even understood why. Elders retold stories of infamous executions like legends passed down through generations. Some executioners even gained fame, celebrated for the artistry of their violence, for how long they could stretch the pain. And yet this was not unique to Europe. Ancient Rome had its gladiators. Aztec priests held hearts aloft on temple steps. The impulse to watch others suffer, publicly, ceremonially, is not a medieval invention, but a human inheritance. Still, the wheel stands apart. Its cruelty was deliberate, methodical, and slow. It made death into a spectacle not of courage, but of humiliation. The twisted body displayed at the town gate was not just a corpse, it was a mirror. A reflection of what society valued and what it feared most. Even royalty, from time to time, observed from balconies above, not always to condemn, sometimes simply to remind the masses of who held the power. But as the Enlightenment dawned, and philosophers questioned the nature of justice, a new question began to emerge. Was this justice, or was it blood-soaked control? Even kings and queens sometimes attended, but not always to condemn. By the 18th century, the wheel was beginning to creak under the weight of a changing world. Enlightenment thinkers had arrived, men like Cesare Beccaria, who argued that justice should be rational, not vengeful, that punishment should be swift, not sadistic. Philosophers and reformers questioned not just the cruelty of the breaking wheel, but its purpose. Was it truly deterring crime, or simply indulging in state-sanctioned brutality? But the wheel did not vanish overnight. In France, the wheel was still used into the early 1800s. One of the last documented cases occurred in 1827. Jean-Baptiste Troppmann, a man accused of slaughtering an entire family, was sentenced to death, and for a moment, the ancient tool was considered. Public pressure led to his beheading instead. The wheel, by then, had become almost too barbaric even for a killer of children, yet in some corners of Europe, especially in parts of the Holy Roman Empire and Eastern territories, the wheel clung to life. It became a ghost of medieval justice, summoned only for the most extreme cases, a relic still used to send a message that no other punishment could. And while the practice faded, the memory remained. In art, the wheel reappeared as a symbol of martyrdom and damnation. In literature, it embodied divine retribution. Saints like Catherine of Alexandria were famously depicted bound to a wheel, her spiritual purity contrasted with the instrument of her intended death. Even though legend says the wheel broke before it could harm her, the imagery endured. In politics, the wheel became a metaphor for authoritarian cruelty. In revolution, it served as a symbol of what the people were rising against. It had once been the instrument of kings, now it was the echo of tyranny. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the way the wheel lives on, not in wood or iron, but in spirit. We no longer tie people to spokes or smash their bones before cheering crowds, but public punishment has simply evolved. The spectacle remains, on screens, in headlines, across social media. We don't gather in the square to watch pain. We scroll, execution videos, online shaming, trials by public opinion, all play into the same hunger the wheel once fed. The need to see, to judge, to punish together. The wheel is gone, its spokes have rotted, its frame has turned to dust, and yet its shadow stretches long, because the real horror of the breaking wheel was never the blood. It was the silence of the crowd, the ones who watched and did nothing. The wheel is gone, but the hunger for punishment remains. The breaking wheel did more than kill. It transformed justice into a performance, one that demanded an audience, a victim, and a message etched in bone. It told the masses, obey, conform, stay silent. It whispered that law was not about fairness, but fear, that power must not only be obeyed, it must be feared. And it worked for centuries, but step back, look beyond the shattered limbs and shattered lives. Ask the question that echoes through time, was this ever truly justice, or was it just cruelty in ceremonial robes? The breaking wheel stands as a symbol, not just of medieval brutality, but of what happens when we stop seeing others as human, when punishment becomes performance, when the crowd becomes complicit. And though the wheel no longer turns, the questions it raises still spin through the corridors of our modern world. A rusted circle, forgotten in a museum or buried in the soil of some forgotten square, once spun with the cries of the damned. If this was justice then, what will justice look like centuries from now?